Welcome, I'm Glen Anderson, producer and host of this TV series, Glen's Parallax Perspectives. This series explores a wide variety of issues related to peace, social and economic justice, the environment, and nonviolent social change. We especially provide opportunities for the public to hear voices and viewpoints that are rarely heard in mainstream media. Mainstream media, politicians, and culture see the world in conventional ways. The establishment is stuck in how they see the world. In order to solve problems, we need to see things differently. This TV series, Glen's Parallax Perspectives, can help us see things differently so we can solve problems at all levels, from the local to the global. This series is called Glen's Parallax Perspectives. Here's what the word parallax means. Put one finger in front of your nose and another finger farther away. Close one eye, then open that eye and close the other. Your fingers will seem to move. This is called a parallax view. This TV series invites you to look at issues from fresh perspectives. Also, see much information about the issues that we cover in this TV series and previous episodes of this series at my blog, www.parallaxperspectives.org. And now I invite you to watch this month's program. Welcome. I'm Glen Anderson. This is Glen's Parallax Perspectives. I produce and host this series. We explore a wide variety of issues related to peace, social and economic justice, the environment, and nonviolent social change. We especially provide opportunities for the public to hear voices and viewpoints that are rarely heard in mainstream media. Normally, I interview guests during this hour, but for the topic that I was planning, the high-quality guests that I was seeking were not available for this production night, so we'll conduct that interview in a later month. For this month, we will be providing insights into the persistent problem of the death penalty. I'll summarize how the death penalty fails to deliver what it promises. I'll also summarize that the death penalty actually makes problems worse and causes new problems. And I'll explain why we can abolish the death penalty without hurting public safety. Finally, the last part of the program will propose some steps toward abolishing the death penalty, and I'll provide some resources for more information and opportunities so we can organize that. The more people know about the death penalty, the more they discover three basic facts. The first half of this TV program focuses on these three basic facts. Fact number one is that the death penalty does not deliver on what it promises. Fact two is that the death penalty makes existing problems worse and it causes more problems. Fact three is that we can actually let go of the death penalty and still be safe. So let's start with fact one. The death penalty does not deliver on its promises. Specifically, one example is it does not deter murder. When most murders occur, the offender is under severe emotional stress and/or the influence of alcohol or drugs. They are not thinking rationally enough to analyze the probabilities of being caught, convicted, and sentenced to death, and so there's no deterrent there. Some murders are rationally planned, but those killers think they've planned ways to not get caught at all, and so the death penalty does not deter them either. Some of the most horrible murders end with the killer committing suicide, so the risk of execution was no deterrent to those murders either. Texas and the southern states that execute the most people still have very high murder rates. And indeed, decades of scientific studies have consistently shown that the death penalty does not deter people from committing murder. Nowadays, when experts debate the death penalty, Intelligent supporters no longer raise this claim at all. For all of these reasons, deterrence is not a valid reason for keeping the death penalty. Second point here is that the death penalty does not provide justice. Even though the death penalty does not deter, doesn't it at least provide some kind of a justice, a balancing of life taking a life? Nope. Civilized society's sense of true justice has evolved beyond mere retaliation. We don't burn down the homes of arsonists. We don't cut off the hands of thieves. The U.S. is virtually alone among Western democracies in failing to abolish the death penalty. The U.S. is one of the world's biggest executioners, along with several nations with horrible human rights records, such as China, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, Yemen. Nor does the death penalty help the victim's family. Nothing could ever bring the victim back to his or her family. Families of murder victims have other needs, but killing the killer does not satisfy their real needs. Many families of murder victims oppose the death penalty, and they have created organizations to move toward abolishing it. When the person who committed the murder is executed, his or her entire family is forced to suffer as innocent people for the crime committed by their one relative. The rest of the family is innocent, and the death penalty hurts the criminal's innocent family. That's not right. Another way that the death penalty fails to deliver on what it promises is that it does not get used on the worst of the worst. Many people think that, well, the death penalty has a lot of defects, but we should keep it so that we can execute the worst of the worst. But that's not who gets executed. Each case goes through a long and complex process with many screens or filters, such as, was the victim white, economically privileged, attractive, and well-liked? What about the defendant's race, economic class, and access to skilled lawyers? What do the press and the politicians think about the case? All of today's modern society's biases and prejudices play into the various screens and filters, so the net result, an actual execution, is the result of society's biases and prejudices more than the merits of the individual case. Look at the actual record. The people who are executed are not the worst of the worst. They are the poorest and the most disadvantaged, and people with mental illnesses. This is not real justice. The death penalty fails in yet another way. It does not even save money. Each death penalty case consists of 2 trials. The first is to determine guilt, and the second trial is to determine the sentence. Each trial is extremely complex, with many, many opportunities for bias, injustice, and other errors. Executions are irreversible. Recent history shows tremendous risks and gross injustices, so each death penalty trial must be extremely complex. But we all know that the more complex something is, the more it costs and the more risk arises that something can go wrong. Even before the appeals processes, the original trials in a death penalty case have already cost much more than a life sentence. And death sentences are extremely likely to be overturned, so that money has been wasted. Also, death penalty cases consume so much resources in county-level courts, state supreme courts, and federal appeals courts that they waste the time, attention, and resources that are needed for other cases. This denies justice to other people who need access to the courts. Now we come to fact 2. In addition to failing to deliver what it promises, the death penalty makes existing problems worse, and the death penalty also causes more problems. One example is that the death penalty, of course, is violent, it's killing somebody, and that violence escalates the cycle of violence. Society is right to want to stop violent crime, but when fear or racism or other emotions cause us to retaliate, we only make the problem worse. We are repeating the cycle of violence. The death penalty is inherently contradictory. When our government kills people who have killed people, we contradict our stated intent of showing that killing is wrong. The death penalty actually promotes the notion that it's okay to kill somebody in order to vent your anger and get your way. Indeed, some studies have shown increases in violent crime near the dates of highly publicized executions. Executions brutalize society and unleash ugly, uncivilized behaviors. The death penalty is part of the U.S.'s culture of violent punishment. Let's recognize that the death penalty really is part of our nation's long-standing culture of violent punishment and denial of due process. Examples include the old Wild West legacy of posses to hunt suspects and hang them. You might remember the 1943 movie, The Oxbow Incident. The death penalty examples include the dynamics behind racist lynchings of African Americans. The tough on crime laws that emphasize severe punishment instead of either prevention or rehabilitation is another aspect of our culture of violent punishment. And so is those stand your ground laws that let ordinary people shoot and kill people just based on fear. We also experience the increasingly violent and militarized foreign policy that lets us bomb other countries for our government's perceptions of their misbehavior, also without due process. And at the domestic level, we see an increasingly violent and militarized policing of American cities with special emphasis on police violence against minorities. So I mentioned foreign policy just a moment ago, and there are a number of ways in which the death penalty really is similar to our violent foreign policy. War and the death penalty both draw from the same roots and cause many of the same problems. Both war and the death penalty assume that we can solve problems by killing people. Avoid looking for underlying systemic roots of problems. Assume that we are righteous and pure, but they are totally evil and cannot be rehabilitated. Both war and the death penalty practice racism, classism, xenophobia, and other kinds of oppression against the other. Both war and the death penalty dehumanize other people, even calling lawbreakers monsters instead of human beings. They both often break laws, domestic laws and international laws, in order to carry out their killing. Both war and the death penalty break apart the human family locally, nationally, and globally, rather than promote healing and unity. And they both waste huge amounts of money on methods that only make problems worse. The death penalty causes a lot of problems. One that would not exist if we did not have the death penalty is that innocent people are sentenced to be executed, and some really are executed. From the mid-1970s through 2017, 161 persons on death row were found to have been wrongly convicted. Despite our very complex and expensive death penalty system, prosecutors, judges, and juries convicted beyond a reasonable doubt and sentenced to death 161 people who were actually innocent. Many had spent 10 or 15 years or even longer on death row for crimes they did not commit. The truth of their innocence often came outside of the regular system. Mistakes often happen, but it's too late to correct the mistakes after somebody has been executed. We have indeed executed a number of totally innocent persons. Another problem, some people say, well, let's limit the appeals so we can get on with more executions. But if we limit the appeals, that would cause even more innocent people to be executed. Even with our current long appeals processes, we still execute some innocent people. Shortening the appeals process would cause even more executions of innocent people. Many innocent people, as I said, were on death row for 10 or 15 years or longer before the truth of it came out. And so limiting appeals would sharply reduce honest judgment and execute many more innocent people. When the government has executed an innocent person, it's too late to fix that horrible mistake. The only way to stop executing innocent people is to stop executing people altogether. Another problem is that the death penalty is especially biased by race and by socioeconomic class. Many decision points occur while investigating, arresting, prosecuting, trying, and sentencing. Each decision point allows for bias and discrimination on the basis of race, social class, economic resources, mental disability, political considerations, and other factors. Research shows that death sentences are much more likely when the victim is white. Research consistently shows that even when the basic facts of the crime are similar, persons of color are much more likely than whites to be sentenced to death and executed. And although the death penalty's horrible record of inconsistencies and racism caused the U.S. Supreme Court to throw out the death penalty nationwide in 1972, the same kinds of problems quickly crept back into the process, and today's much more harsh and insensitive Supreme Court now allows the death penalty to proceed regardless of systemic racism. The death penalty is not efficient. A tremendous number of death sentences are overturned by courts, by later findings of innocence, and by other methods. Very few death sentences actually result in execution. Because the vast majority of cases consume large amounts of money and time without resulting in actual executions, the actual cost of the death penalty per execution is very high. It's a waste of our tax dollars. So we've laid out some facts that the death penalty fails to deliver what it promises. We've laid out some facts about how the death penalty makes existing problems worse and causes new problems. Now we come to fact number 3, which is that we can let go of the death penalty and still be safe. Some people think that we need the death penalty in order to be safe. However, this fear assumes that the death penalty is commonly assigned to murder cases, and it assumes that the absence of the death penalty would leave a great void and put us all in danger. Actually, very few murder cases could even qualify for death sentences. In Washington State, which is typical, the death sentences is possible, not required, but only possible, only for those homicides that are first-degree murder and have certain aggravating factors that are defined by law and are free from mitigating circumstances that are defined by law, and for which the county prosecuting attorney has chosen to charge as capital crimes, and for which the juries are unanimous in imposing the sentence of death. The death penalty is possible only for cases that meet all of these very stringent requirements. Death sentences cannot be imposed in any case that lacks even one of these requirements. Therefore, for the vast majority of homicides, the death penalty cannot even be considered. The vast majority of homicides are already covered
by existing state laws that provide for prison sentences through regular sentencing procedures. So it is practically irrelevant to ask how we would live without the death penalty. In nearly all homicide cases, we already are living without the death penalty. Furthermore, even when death sentences are imposed, the offender is very unlikely to be executed. So in effect, we already impose life sentences even when we think that we're imposing the death penalty. Washington State executed nobody for nearly 3 decades, from the mid-1960s through 1992. In 1972, the U.S. Supreme Court had thrown out all states' death penalty laws because they violated the U.S. Constitution. They were just too screwy, too racist, too inconsistent, too unwieldy, and just inherently biased in a lot of ways. But a few years after that 1972 decision, some states rewrote their laws, and the Supreme Court said, well, that's okay now. Since then, Washington State has sentenced a few dozen persons to death, but nearly all of their sentences were overturned for various reasons. Out of the dozens of persons sentenced to death in Washington State, only a handful, almost always fewer than 10, are on death row at any given time. Washington State executed only 5 persons between 1993 and the present day in 2018. This is an almost trivial number when compared to the overall number of homicides throughout the state during these decades. Except for those 5 cases, people stay on Washington State's death row until an appeal overturns the death sentence or until they die from natural causes. The death penalty is practically irrelevant in Washington in terms of public safety. However, it does waste a lot of court time, and it does waste a lot of taxpayers' money, and it perpetuates the cycle of violence and brutalizes society by the existence of the death penalty law in our state. The death penalty law always includes the risk of gross injustice through innocence, racial bias, and other causes. So actually, Washington State law already provides an alternative to the death penalty. In Washington State, for the very rare kinds of homicide cases that could result in a death sentence, the default sentence already is life without any possibility of parole. If for whatever reason the jury is not unanimous in imposing a death sentence, the offender would serve a life sentence and never be eligible for parole. A sentence of life without parole means exactly what it says. The person will be in prison for the rest of his or her life and could never qualify for parole. This is a very severe punishment. The death penalty does not protect society any better than this. 19 states in the United States and all of the European nations and a growing number of other countries around the world do not use the death penalty at all, so they already are effectively living well without the death penalty. In much of the U.S. and much of the world, people don't worry about how to replace the death penalty because they're already living just fine without it. They impose prison sentences without getting mired in the problems and complexities of trying to impose death sentences. So now we've established 3 facts. Fact number 1 was that the death penalty does not deliver on what it promises. Fact number 2 is that the death penalty makes existing problems worse and it causes more problems. And fact 3 is we can let go of the death penalty and still be safe. Now I invite you to consider a 3-step strategy to abolish the death penalty. And that's on the screen now. The 3-step strategy to abolish it is number 1, to make the death penalty a hot issue that society absolutely must discuss seriously. Strategy step number 2 is to persuade a majority of public opinion that the death penalty is fatally flawed. And we can undermine public support for the death penalty by showing it does not deliver what it promises and it actually makes problems worse. And that's what we've been discussing thus far in the program. We have the third strategy step of providing alternatives that will meet the public desire for safety without resorting to the death penalty, and I've mentioned that already just now. So let's take these steps in turn. To abolish the death penalty, we need to strategize. We need to make it a hot, something that we can organize from the grassroots up. Let me back up to another slide here. We'll cover this in just a moment. So we have to make the death penalty a hot issue that society must, back to this again, must discuss. In order to stimulate serious public discussion, we need to identify the underlying values, connect with people at the heart level, and provide solid information for people's head level. When people really understand the facts and examine their values, most will quit tacitly supporting the death penalty, and some will join our movement to abolish it. We do not need to convert everybody, but we do need to change enough of public opinion so that large numbers of voters will want to abolish the death penalty, and they will persuade the legislators to do so. Our outreach should include reaching out to civic and religious leaders, prosecutors, and media and legislators. So the second step in this three-step strategy is to persuade a majority of public opinion that the death penalty is flawed, undermine public support for it by showing that it doesn't deliver on what it promises and it makes problems worse. And that's what we've been discussing earlier in this program. Only when we've shifted public opinion enough will enough legislators agree with us and pass a law to just simply repeal the death penalty. The amount of wording changed in that is minimal. It's just a few words in one particular law, and that's all there is to it. People say that support for the death penalty is a mile wide and an inch deep. It's widespread, but not really deeply held. Most of the support is tacit rather than enthusiastic. Indeed, most people already have various kinds of nagging doubts about the death penalty. These nagging doubts include worry about executing innocent people, bias against racial minorities and poor people and people with mental disabilities, failure to actually deter murder, and the hypocrisy of killing people in order to show that killing is wrong. So people have those nagging doubts already. We have to strengthen people's suspicion that the death penalty is fatally flawed. We have to help people understand that the death penalty, besides failing to deliver what it promises, actually causes these other problems that we've been discussing. Now we come on to step 3 at the bottom of this screen. We have to provide alternatives that will meet the public desire for safety without resorting to the death penalty. And we've talked about that already a bit. So just now we identified the first step, making it a hot issue that people have to grapple with, and the second step, convincing people that the death penalty is fatally flawed. The third step of strategy will be to help make the public feel safe enough without it that they can choose to let go of it. And a moment ago I said that in Washington State, the default sentence is already life without any possibility of parole. This three-step strategy would allow the public to let go of the death penalty. And sometimes I wear a button that says, when the people lead, eventually the leaders will follow. And I really believe that. When legislators and elected prosecutors see that the public wants to abolish the death penalty, they will let go of it too. Already in Washington State, nearly all death sentences come from just 4 of our state's 39 counties: King, Pierce, Snohomish, and Kitsap. The other 35 counties in Washington State almost never impose a death sentence. So we're really on our way toward abolishing the death penalty statewide. In February 2014, Washington State Governor Jay Inslee announced a moratorium on executions so long as he's governor. He said that the death penalty has many problems. This is a good step, but it's modest, but it is a good first step. Governor Inslee's announcement called for a public conversation about the death penalty. When a politician calls for a public conversation about a controversial issue, that politician is implying that he does not think it's politically safe for him to move further ahead until a majority of public opinion moves that issue further ahead. A majority of public opinion will create the political safety for him and other politicians to move ahead and abolish the death penalty. The issue will not move ahead without a very strong grassroots movement for vigorous public outreach to shift public opinion toward political safety for politicians who will then work to abolish the death penalty. Governor Inslee created an opening for us to raise the issue. The next step is up to us. Now is the time to move boldly ahead with a strategically savvy campaign of public outreach to broad audiences and also to targeted audience. Now is the time, when no execution is pending, for us to promote vigorous political discussion. When an execution is pending, it's a hard time to make progress because the media has demonized the condemned person into being perceived as a monster. We can make more progress now while there is a moratorium on executions. Yes, we have to work to make it a hot issue, but at least we're not fighting an uphill struggle against a demonized monster. And I do need to note that Inslee's 2014 moratorium on executions still allows new cases to be brought forward and cases already in the system to keep moving ahead, all the way up to the point of execution, and he just will not sign the execution order. So the death penalty is still a live issue in Washington State, despite the moratorium on just the execution part. So here are a few steps that I want to talk about in the next few minutes about how to develop a winning strategy. One is to educate yourself. Educate some friends and members of your local faith community and your other existing groups to which you belong. At the end of the program, I'll list some good sources of information. I encourage you to join a local group or a statewide or a national group working on this, or start a new group. A lot of good things happening because people have gotten some friends together around a kitchen table or in a living room to start talking about a topic of mutual concern. And I can help with that. I'll give my phone number and email at the end. Learn how to organize at the grassroots, how to strategize for social change movements, and so forth. I can refer you to resources, conduct workshops, and so forth, and I'll mention that opportunity at the end. Another outreach method as this part of a winning strategy would be to reach out to potentially sympathetic groups of people and also to more mainstream populations. We can make progress if we were to discuss the issue with state-level elected officials, such as legislators and candidates, and also with candidates for county prosecuting attorney, because the county prosecuting attorney has the discretion about whether to file a death penalty charge or a regular murder charge for a case that might meet those criteria. So we need to talk with our county prosecuting attorneys and explain to them why they should never bring death penalty charges. We need to put abolition of the death penalty into political party platforms. We need to network with other people in other communities. We can share our own experiences of what has worked well and how to do things better. We can share resources such as this TV program, which you can watch through my blog, www.parallaxperspectives.org. Click the death penalty link or the TV programs link. To abolish the death penalty, we need to strategize and organize from the grassroots up. The good stuff that's happened in our nation, the good things in political and social issues, all come from the grassroots up. The women's movement was a grassroots movement, not a gift from the top down. The labor movement, the environmental movement, the peace movement. All these things are people at the grassroots level that say, hey, we want to organize and change things and turn things around. And that's the kind of grassroots movement base that we need for the movement to abolish the death penalty. Ordinary people really can organize at their local grassroots to promote social justice. We need to identify the goals we seek, in this case, abolish the death penalty. And there are other goals later on about other aspects of the criminal justice system. But starting with the death penalty is what we need to deal with that particular issue. To reach any goal, we need to devise workable strategies for grassroots organizing, and that's quite feasible too. The workshops I offer give insights into that. There's a lot of very, very workable, practical methods. To abolish the death penalty, we have to develop smart and practical strategies to do precisely that. As I said a few minutes ago, politicians will not vote to abolish the death penalty unless and until they feel like it is politically safe to do so. And therefore, as I said a moment ago, the movement to abolish the death penalty must be a grassroots movement that shifts public opinion so the public will call for abolition of the death penalty. And therefore, we need strategies that will shift public opinion. A lot has been written about this, and we don't have time to repeat all of that now, but trust me, there's a lot of information, and I have resources available through my blog, www.parallaxperspectives.org, and in lots of other ways. You can also phone me or email me, and I can provide resources. A lot has been written about this. A lot of experience is already accumulated, so we don't need to reinvent the wheel. What we need to do is use our best practices. We can learn from other people, and we can learn from other grassroots-based social change movements. We can make incremental progress, as we did when Washington State and other states passed laws protecting developmentally disabled persons from execution. We just changed the law to specifically, explicitly exempt developmentally disabled persons. We did that state by state until many states had done this, and then the U.S. Supreme Court recognized what they called evolving standards of decency, and the U.S. Supreme Court extended that nationwide. In the same way, Washington State and other states passed laws protecting juveniles from being executed. We changed the law, and we did this state by state until many states had done this, and the U.S. Supreme Court recognized again what it still calls evolving standards of decency, and they extended that prohibition nationwide. We can do the same thing to protect persons with severe mental illness. That would be the next frontier, and that would be one way to chip away at this. I mentioned a lot of excellent sources of information exist. These resources include knowledgeable persons, nonprofit organizations, websites, books, articles, videos, and more. I've written a good number of informative and practical items, and I've posted them to the death penalty portions of 2 websites. If you visit www.parallaxperspectives.org and click death penalty, you'll see a lot of stuff that I've written, and a lot of other resources too. If you visit www.olympiafor.org and click death penalty, you'll see a lot of great resources, including many things that I've written. A lot of the things on those sites that I've written do not appear on other people's websites, so this is a great resource to check these out. For more than 2 decades, the Olympia Fellowship of Reconciliation has organized its Committee for Alternatives to the Death Penalty. You can email deathpenalty@olympiafor.org. You can call 360-870-8068. I'm another alternate contact. You can email me at glenanderson@integra.net or phone me at 360-491-9093. Our local committee meets monthly. We inform ourselves. We organize activities to inform the public, and the government. The Washington Coalition to Abolish the Death Penalty is the statewide nonprofit group. They have an office based in Seattle. Their phone is 206-622-8952. Their website is www.abolishdeathpenalty.org. They especially work at the legislative level, and they have contact people nationwide or statewide. Many other states, almost every state has a coalition to abolish the death penalty. They operate under different names, but we all belong to the National Coalition to Abolish the Death Penalty. And if you are watching this from another state, you can visit www.ncadp.org or phone 202-331-4090 and look for your state affiliate. They have a huge amount of information there about efforts to abolish the death penalty, including information about what's wrong with it and so forth, and historical information and so forth. An amazingly informative source of information is the Death Penalty Information Center. I've been using their resources for many, many years. They just have an amazing wealth of information on the problems, state by state information, historical information, lots and lots and lots of information resources. I encourage you to visit www.deathpenaltyinfo.org and just explore. There's lots of stuff that's fascinating and materials that you won't see elsewhere. And if you don't have access to internet, you can phone them at 202-289-2275. But I really emphasize the value of that amazing website. I am looking for audiences and locations where I can present a 6-session workshop series that I've developed about nonviolent grassroots organizing. This pulls together a lot of really great insights, experiences, resources, strategies, encouragement, and so forth. It starts with this 6-session series that I developed of workshops, starts with a thoughtful grounding in profound nonviolence, because that needs to be the basis of everything that we do. It proceeds through the theory and practice of organizing grassroots movements. It includes strategizing, practical nuts and bolts, how to get our message out to the public, and all kinds of other great stuff. I recommend this highly. I could do this in as short as 90 minutes per session, but I recommend allowing a 2-hour block for each of these 6 sessions so that we can have more interaction. And if somebody out of town wants me to do this, we might want to schedule 3 on one weekend day and the other 3 sessions on the next weekend day, like 2 Saturdays in a row or 2 Sundays in a row. And you can contact me for more information. My email and phone are on this screen, Glen Anderson at integra.net, 360-491-9093. And I can also refer you to a lot of other resources. These workshops include a lot of handouts that can really get you up and running. During the first half hour of this program, we established 3 facts. Fact number 1 was that the death penalty does not deliver on what it promises. Fact number 2 was that the death penalty makes existing problems worse and it causes more problems. And here are all 3 on one screen. Fact 3 is we can actually let go of the death penalty and still be safe. So that was the first half. Second half of this hour, proposed steps toward abolishing death penalty and resources. Our world is bogged down by many kinds of violence. People of conscience are responsible for acting upon our best values to reduce violence. If we are determined and strategically savvy, we can abolish the death penalty in our state and in our nation, as nearly all of the civilized world has done. I invite you to connect and help. Usually in these TV programs, I interview guests. The guests that I wanted for the program I had initially intended for this taping night were not available, so that's why I'm doing this with no guest. But next month, I will schedule a different topic and will interview some knowledgeable and interesting guests. I have a number of topics queued up for subsequent months. You can read what I said during this hour and see a list of information sources by visiting my blog, www.parallaxperspectives.org. If you visit that, click the TV programs link and the title of this episode, Death Penalty Does Not Work. It makes problems worse, let's abolish it. You can also click the death penalty link at that blog, parallaxperspectives.org. You can also see a lot of materials about the death penalty, as I said earlier, at the death penalty part of www.olympiafor.org. You can get a lot of information about a wide variety of issues related to peace, social justice, and nonviolence through my blog, www.parallaxperspectives.org, or by phoning me at 360-491-9093. We are all one human family. We all share one planet. We can create a better world, but we all have to work at it. And the world needs you. You can help. You can help abolish the death penalty. You can help abolish nuclear weapons. You can help provide social justice, economic justice, a better environment, a healthy ecosystem and climate. All of these things, it's all up to us. So thank you for watching.